Commander Eric stood vigil on the ancient stone outcrop, his weathered hands gripping the wooden staff that had guided countless battles. Below him stretched the valley where destiny would soon unfold. The Mongol horde approached, their reputation preceding them like thunder before lightning. Yet Eric knew something these steppes warriors did not understand about warfare in these foreign lands. The Mongol army appeared like a storm front moving across the steppes, their disciplined formation stretching beyond the horizon. 10,000 horsemen rode in perfect synchronization, their curved blades catching the weak morning light. Each warrior wore the confidence of 1,000 victories, their horses bred for speed and endurance. The golden banners of their khans snapped in the wind as they advanced toward the valley where Eric waited. Eric's weathered face showed the weight of command as he watched the approaching storm. These Mongol warriors had conquered half the known world through superior mobility and psychological warfare. Their feigned retreats and encirclement tactics had destroyed every army that faced them in open battle. But here, in these rocky confines, their greatest strength would become their fatal weakness. Each Mongol warrior was a master of mounted warfare, trained from childhood to shoot accurately while galloping at full speed. Their composite bows could pierce armor at impossible distances, their arrows blackening the sky like deadly rain. They moved as one organism, communicating through subtle gestures and battle cries that echoed across the plains. Their horses were bred for the steppes, swift as wind and enduring as stone. Eric's army numbered barely 3,000, a collection of farmers, merchants, and craftsmen pressed into service. Their armor was mismatched, their weapons varied, but their eyes burned with something the Mongols had never encountered in their conquests. These were men fighting for their homes, their families, their very existence. They would not retreat because retreat meant slavery or death for all they held dear. The valley narrowed to barely 50 paces at its most constricted point, with towering walls of granite rising on either side. This natural fortress would force the Mongol cavalry into a death march, unable to use their speed or maneuverability. Eric had spent weeks preparing this ground, moving rocks, digging pits, and positioning his men in the perfect locations. Here, numbers meant nothing, and mobility became a curse. The Mongol scouts rode ahead of the main force, their trained eyes seeking signs of the enemy's intentions. They had learned to respect traps and ambushes, having suffered defeats when underestimating local commanders. Yet as they approached the valley entrance, they saw only rocks and shadows. No banners flew, no drums beat, no smoke rose from hidden camps. The silence itself became ominous, like the calm before a hurricane strikes land. Naran Khan studied the valley entrance with the calculating mind of a conqueror who had never known defeat. His ornate armor marked him as a leader among leaders, his warhorse pawing impatiently at the rocky ground. Behind him stretched his army, 10,000 warriors who had swept across continents like wildfire. Yet something in the silence of those towering walls made even this seasoned commander hesitate. Pride warred with caution in his heart. Naran Khan had conquered cities by the dozens, shattered armies 10 times the size of Eric's pathetic force. What were a few rocks and shadows to warriors who had faced the walls of great fortresses? His cavalry could sweep through this valley in moments, crushing any defenders like wheat beneath the hooves of his horses. Yet the scouts had reported strange preparations, unusual movements that did not fit the patterns he had seen in countless battles. The Mongol advance began with typical precision, their cavalry moving into the valley in perfect order. 5 abreast they rode, their horses stepping carefully on the unfamiliar rocky ground. The narrow passage transformed their mighty horde into a slow-moving column, their usual mobility reduced to a cautious crawl. Behind them, the vast army waited, their patience wearing thin as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The walls above seemed to press closer with each step forward. Deep within the valley, the Mongol column stretched like a serpent through stone, their confidence beginning to waver. The walls pressed closer with each step, reducing their mighty army to a vulnerable line of riders. No enemy appeared, no banners flew from the heights above, yet the silence itself grew more ominous. Naran Khan's scouts had found no traps, no ambushes, yet something about this place felt wrong, like walking into a predator's den with eyes that gleamed from the darkness. Hidden among the rocks and crevices, Eric's archers waited with the patience of hunters. These were not professional soldiers but farmers and hunters who knew every stone of these mountains. Their simple bows were strung with the finest sinew, their arrows tipped with broadheads that would tear through leather and flesh alike. They had been positioned along the entire length of the valley, each man knowing his role in the deadly dance that was about to begin. Naran Khan raised his hand in the signal to advance, his confidence returning with each step deeper into the valley. What trap could these peasant soldiers possibly devise against his disciplined warriors? The walls were too steep for any serious resistance, the passage too narrow for more than a few defenders. Soon his army would burst from this rocky prison like water from a broken dam, and these defiant locals would learn the price of challenging the great Khan. Young Baran rode at the center of the column, his painted face showing the traditional war markings of his tribe. Yet his eyes kept drifting upward to the towering walls that seemed to close in around them. His horse, usually steady as stone, pawed nervously at the rocky ground. Something felt wrong in this place, something that made his skin crawl and his heart beat faster. The silence was not the silence of an empty valley, but the silence of a predator waiting to strike. High above the advancing column, a single green flag fluttered in the wind, the prearranged signal that all was ready. Hidden among the rocks, the flag-bearer watched the Mongol army move deeper into the trap. His signal was repeated by others along the valley walls, each man knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. Soon the rocks would rain down like hail, and the arrows would fly like autumn leaves caught in a storm. The first arrows fell like drops of black rain, their whistle cutting through the air before impact. Mongol warriors screamed as broadheads tore through leather and mail, their horses rearing in panic. The deadly rain came from every direction, impossible to dodge or defend against. These were not the arrows of steppe warriors but the shots of mountain hunters who knew their prey intimately. The valley had become a killing field, and the Mongols were the hunted. Desperate arrows flew upward in wild arcs, seeking the invisible enemy who struck from the heights. Yet the rocky walls provided too many hiding places, too many angles of approach. Mongol warriors struggled to reload while their horses reared in panic, wounded animals adding to the chaos. The narrow valley had become a death trap, their superior numbers useless in the confined space. For the first time in living memory, the great Mongol cavalry found themselves at a complete disadvantage. The earth itself seemed to rise against the invaders as massive boulders crashed down from the heights above. Tons of stone struck the packed column with devastating force, crushing warriors and horses alike beneath their weight. These were not random rocks but carefully positioned boulders that had been rolled into place over weeks of preparation. The valley floor shook with each impact, and the screams of dying men echoed off the stone walls like the howling of tortured souls. Retreat became a nightmare as the narrow valley entrance turned into a death trap. Warriors who had never known fear now fought to escape the stone corridor, their horses rearing and screaming in panic. The very discipline that had made them victorious now worked against them, creating a bottleneck that prevented escape. Those at the front could not move fast enough, while those behind pushed forward in desperation. The valley had become a tomb, and they were trapped within its stony embrace. Eric watched from his rocky perch as the trap he had spent months preparing finally closed around the Mongol army. Satisfaction warred with sorrow in his heart, for he knew that each arrow that flew meant another mother's son would never return home. Yet the choice had been made when Naran Khan's banners first appeared on the horizon. These men died not for glory but for survival, their sacrifice buying freedom for those who would come after. Desperation drove some Mongol warriors to abandon their horses and attempt the impossible climb up the sheer rock faces. Their heavy armor and weapons made every handhold treacherous, every step a potential death sentence. Arrows found them even here, striking down climbers who had nearly reached safety. The walls that had seemed so imposing from below now became barriers that trapped them between death from above and death from below. Never had the great Mongol cavalry been so helpless, so completely at the mercy of their enemies. Terror replaced pride in young Baran's eyes as death rained down from the heights above. His war paint, once symbols of courage and strength, now seemed like childish decorations in the face of this mountain slaughter. His horse lay dying beside him, its screams adding to the cacophony of battle. The arrows came from everywhere and nowhere, striking down warriors who had never known defeat. For the first time in his young life, Baran understood what it meant to be truly afraid. A handful of warriors managed to reach a narrow ledge that offered temporary respite from the deadly rain above. They crouched behind whatever cover they could find, their faces showing the shock of men who had never before been on the losing side of a battle. Below them, their comrades still struggled in the valley floor, trapped like animals in a pen. The ledge provided safety but also isolation, cutting them off from any hope of organized resistance or coordinated escape. Eric raised his hand in the signal to cease fire, and suddenly the valley fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the dying. The sudden quiet seemed more ominous than the thunder of battle itself. He had achieved what seemed impossible, destroying a force 3 times his own size through superior positioning and preparation. Yet victory felt hollow, for he knew that more armies would come, and each victory would require the same terrible price in blood and sacrifice. Slowly, like ghosts emerging from a nightmare, the surviving Mongol warriors crawled from their hiding places. Their proud faces were marked with defeat, their eyes showing the confusion of men who could not comprehend what had happened to them. Never in their experience had cavalry been so completely neutralized, their greatest strength turned into their fatal weakness. They gathered in small groups, wounded and leaderless, looking around at the devastation that had been wrought upon them by peasant soldiers fighting on their own ground. Naran Khan pulled himself from beneath his dying warhorse, his ornate armor cracked and bloodied. The golden circlet that had marked him as a leader among leaders now seemed like a mockery, askew upon his head like a broken crown. His saber lay in the dust beside him, its blade chipped from striking stone. The man who had never known defeat now faced the bitter reality of complete tactical failure. His great army, his pride, his very reputation lay scattered across the valley floor like broken toys. Eric descended from his rocky fortress to stand before the man who had threatened everything he held dear. The contrast between them could not have been more stark, the simple leather of a farmer's son facing the ornate armor of a conqueror. Yet it was Eric who stood tall, his weathered face showing no triumph but only the grim satisfaction of a task completed. Naran Khan, once so confident and proud, now looked upon his defeat with the eyes of a man who had finally met his match. In the center of the valley, 2 warriors faced each other in silence, each studying the other with the careful attention of men who understood that much had changed in this place. Eric saw not a monster but a man who had been broken by circumstances beyond his control. Naran Khan saw not a peasant but a commander who had outthought and outfought the greatest military machine the world had ever known. The wind whistled through the valley, carrying away the smoke of battle and leaving only questions in its wake. "You have done what no army has ever done, peasant commander. My cavalry, my pride, my very name lies broken in this valley. Tell me, what manner of man are you that you could defeat the unstoppable tide of the great Khan?" Naran Khan's voice carried across the valley, tinged with respect and the bitter taste of defeat. His words were not those of a conquered man but of a warrior who sought to understand how the impossible had become reality. "I am a man who loves his home more than his life, who values his people more than glory. Your cavalry is indeed unstoppable on the open plains, Khan Naran, but you brought them to fight a battle in a place where their strength became weakness. Mountains do not care for the reputation of armies, only for the weight of stone and the accuracy of arrows. You learned today that pride and presumption can be fatal companions on the field of war." Naran Khan nodded slowly, the proud bearing of a conqueror returning despite his defeat. He had made the error that great commanders sometimes make, underestimating the enemy and overestimating his own invincibility. The valley had taught him a harsh lesson, one that would echo through the ages of Mongol warfare. Yet even in defeat, he maintained the dignity of a warrior who understood that sometimes the greatest victories come from learning how to lose with grace. The Mongol commander drew his saber and offered it hilt first to Eric, the traditional gesture of surrender among warriors. The blade was magnificent, its steel forged in the fires of the distant steppes, its hilt decorated with gold and precious stones. Yet as Eric's weathered hands closed around the weapon, he understood that he held not just a sword but a symbol of victory that would echo through the ages. Never again would Mongol cavalry face such a perfect trap, for word of this defeat would spread like wildfire across the empire. Eric pushed the sword back toward its owner, his weathered hands showing no desire for the trophy of war. True victory, he understood, lay not in the destruction of one's enemies but in their transformation into allies. Naran Khan's eyes widened in surprise at this unexpected mercy, for he had expected the traditional treatment of a defeated commander. The gesture of respect passed between them like a sacred oath, binding two warriors together in mutual understanding despite their recent enmity. Their hands met in the ancient gesture of warriors who had faced death and found honor on both sides. No words were needed as they clasped hands, each understanding that they had been part of something greater than themselves. The valley had witnessed not just a battle but a turning point in the history of warfare, where the mobility of the steppes had been defeated by the cunning of the mountains. In that moment, enemies became something approaching friends, bound together by the shared experience of combat and the mutual respect that follows true courage. Gather around, my brothers, for we have much to learn from this day. Naran Khan's voice carried across the valley, still commanding despite his defeat. His surviving warriors gathered close, their faces showing shame at their failure but respect for their commander's dignity. You have witnessed something that no Mongol has ever seen, the defeat of our invincible cavalry by men who understood their own ground better than we understood theirs. This is not shame but education, not defeat but preparation for battles yet to come. We brought the weapons of the steppes to fight a battle in the mountains, and the mountains answered with stone and arrow. Our greatest strength, our mobility, became our fatal weakness in terrain that channeled our army like water through a narrow gorge. These men understood something we forgot in our pride, that every battlefield has its own rules, and the wise commander learns to fight according to the ground beneath his feet rather than the reputation of his army. My brothers, today you have proven that courage and cunning can overcome any odds, no matter how impossible they may seem. You have shown that the heart of a free man beats stronger than the discipline of a slave, that knowledge of one's own ground matters more than the reputation of distant conquests. The world will speak of this day for generations to come, not as the victory of peasants over princes, but as the triumph of wisdom over arrogance. Study well what you have witnessed here, for these lessons may save your lives in battles yet to come. Terrain is the greatest weapon any commander can wield, and understanding your own ground better than your enemy understands his is the key to victory against any odds. Speed and mobility mean nothing when trapped between stone walls, while a few well-placed archers can hold off an army 10 times their size when positioned correctly. Remember this valley, and remember that pride and presumption are the enemies of every warrior. Even in defeat, the Mongol warriors maintained their discipline, turning their attention to the wounded with the same efficiency they had shown in battle. Their hands moved with practiced skill as they tended to injuries that would have crippled lesser soldiers. The bonds of brotherhood that had carried them across continents remained unbroken, proving that true warriors are defined not by victory or defeat but by their response to adversity. Eric watched with grudging respect, understanding that he had faced enemies worthy of the name. Eric moved among his own wounded with the gentle hands of a healer, his weathered fingers working with surprising skill to tend injuries that would have felled other men. His simple methods, learned from years of frontier living, proved as effective as any battlefield medicine. Yet what struck the Mongol observers most was the obvious loyalty his soldiers showed him, the way they called out his name with hope rather than fear. Here was a commander who led not through terror but through love, and that made all the difference in the world. Former enemies worked side by side in the valley, their hands joined in the common purpose of caring for the fallen and wounded. Mongol warriors carried their own injured with the same care shown by peasant soldiers tending their comrades. The valley floor, once a place of death and destruction, slowly transformed into a field of healing where the bonds of shared suffering replaced the divisions of war. Eric watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that true victory lay not in destruction but in the ability to heal what had been broken. Commander Eric, I have learned much in this valley about the nature of true strength and wisdom. My Khan will not understand this defeat, but I do, and I see opportunity where others might see only shame. Let us form an alliance, your mountain warriors and my steppe riders, for together we could forge something that neither of us could achieve alone. The world has never seen such a partnership, but perhaps it is time for new ways in warfare. Eric studied the Mongol commander with the careful attention of a man who had learned that the greatest victories often come from unexpected sources. An alliance between mountain warriors and steppe riders would indeed create something unprecedented in the history of warfare, combining the mobility of cavalry with the tactical cunning of infantry. Yet he also understood that trust between former enemies must be built slowly, like a fire that needs careful tending to burn bright and true. In the center of the valley where so much blood had been spilled, the two commanders sealed their alliance with the ancient ceremony of blood brotherhood. Their hands clasped in the traditional warrior's grip, their eyes meeting in mutual understanding of what this moment meant for the future of warfare. The valley that had witnessed the greatest defeat in Mongol history now became the birthplace of something entirely new, a partnership that would change the face of battle forever. The valley echoed with the sounds of new training exercises as Mongol riders and mountain warriors learned each other's techniques. Steppe tactics merged with mountain cunning, cavalry charges adapted to rocky terrain, and traditional infantry formations incorporated the speed and mobility of mounted warfare. Eric watched with growing excitement as his peasant soldiers learned to think like cavalrymen while the Mongols discovered the tactical advantages of fighting on familiar ground. Here was born a new kind of warfare that would echo through the ages. Together they stood on the rocky outcrop where Eric had first watched the Mongol horde approach, now transformed from a place of impending doom to the birthplace of military revolution. The valley below bore little resemblance to the field of carnage that had existed just days before, its slopes now dotted with training camps where former enemies worked side by side. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape, both commanders understood that they had witnessed not just a battle but the birth of a new era in warfare.